Australia has been a member of FIFA, the governing body for football in the world, since 1963. But there was a time when the land down under was exiled from the rest of the world, when it defied some of FIFA's long-standing rules around transfer fees. It saw Australia in the footballing wilderness for 3 years, unable to compete in qualification for the FIFA World Cup or the Summer Olympics, or even compete in international friendlies. It set the governing body back decades in reputation and threatened to halt the game's progress after a major boom following the arrival of a wave of migrants to Australia after World War II. This is the story of how Australia was banned from FIFA. But before we get to that, it's time to have a look back at some history in Australian football. Despite records of games similar to association football being played in Brisbane, Hobart and Melbourne during the 1870s, the first match under the official laws of the game was contested at the Parramatta Common on August 14, 1880, between the Wanderers Football Club and the King's School. The Wanderers, considered the first soccer club in Australia, had been founded 11 days prior to the match by John Walter Fletcher. 2 years later, Fletcher was instrumental in the formation of the New South Wales English Football Association, the very first administrative governing body for football in Australia, and one of the first to be established outside the United Kingdom. This governing body would go through a number of restructures and name changes over the years, leading to what we know as today as Football New South Wales. In 1884, Victoria founded its own governing body, as did Queensland and Northern New South Wales. In 1896, the Western Australia Soccer FA was formed, followed by a Tasmania Association in 1900. South Australia followed suit in 1902. A governing body was not formed until 1911. It would become known as the Commonwealth Football Association and it would oversee all football activities across Australia. The body was then superseded by the Australian Soccer Football Association, which was formed in 1921 with its headquarters in Sydney. A year later, in 1922, the first Australian national football team would play, touring New Zealand. It lost 2 of its 3 matches. It took another 32 years before Australia was granted provisional membership by FIFA in November 1954. It was later confirmed in June 1956. This move by FIFA came just in time for the 1956 Summer Olympics, held in Melbourne. Unfortunately for the host, Australia bowed out of the Olympics to India 4-2 in the quarterfinals. Now, football in Australia boomed significantly after World War II after the arrival of tens of thousands of migrants from Europe. They founded their own clubs all across the country, which led to a rise of football participation and attendances. Club teams from Europe and the United Kingdom arrived on tours during the Northern Hemisphere off-season and played against district, state and national teams in front of crowds of more than 30,000 in Melbourne and Sydney. In 1957, Hungarian giants Ferencváros and Vienna-based FK Austria both toured Australia. Now, FK Austria would play 11 games during its tour of Australia, losing just 2 matches, including one to Australia and Newcastle, and the other to Ferencváros. It was reported at the time that FK Austria had lost £5,000 on the tour, but that tour had laid the seeds for the defection of a number of the club's leading players in the future. One of those players was Leo Baumgartner, who would become the superstar of Australian football in the years to come. During FK Austria's 1957 tour, he marvelled at the beautiful scenery in Manly and lunched at a restaurant called Prague in Sydney. He took those memories back to Vienna and, over a meal with teammate Karl Jarosz, hatched a plan to return down under. Their wives agreed, fascinated by the prospect of white sand beaches. The pair was signed by the Sydney-based Prague club in 1958. No transfer fees were paid to the Austrian club, as Baumgartner and Jarosz claimed they were immigrating to Australia. This was during a time when clubs were required to pay a transfer fee for a player, even if their contract had expired. This was ultimately overturned in 1995 with the Bosman ruling, which introduced the concept of the free transfer. Down in Victoria, Wilhelmina, later Ringwood Wilhelmina and then Ringwood City Soccer Club, secured top-class Dutch footballer Cecile de Broekhier in 1956, who'd played 7 games for the Dutch national team. De Broekhier was offered a huge package by Swiss club Lugano to join, including 150,000 Dutch guilders, a house by a lake and a car. But Willem II, his club in his native land, refused to release him. Upset, De Broekhier left for Australia within days. Wilhelmina claimed the Victorian title in 1959 with his services. Back in Sydney, Tensions had been building for years between administrators of the New South Wales Soccer Football Association and the migrant clubs. Disputes were over gate takings, payments to players, player transfers, and the fact that migrant clubs were facing issues getting into the top division due to rules insisting teams had to be aligned to a district. In 1957, Sydney Austral, along with several migrant and district clubs, broke away from the association to form a new governing body, the New South Wales Federation of Soccer Clubs. It established a rival competition to the official association. It gave control of the competition to clubs, let them retain gate takings, brought in player payments, and allowed any club, district or migrant, to play at the top level. Within a couple of seasons, this alternative structure prevailed over the old amateur association model, inspiring similar club-controlled professional competitions to become the standard across Australia. Following the breakaway, 3 Sydney clubs, Prague, Hakoah and Austral, as well as 2 Melbourne teams, Wilhelmina and Hakoah, began aggressively importing players from clubs in Austria, the Netherlands and later Israel. With an appealing lifestyle and significant money on offer, 34 players soon arrived down under. The 5 Australian clubs refused to pay any transfer fees to the Dutch and Austrian clubs, arguing the players had come as migrants, not footballers, and therefore they didn't need to pay fees. The European clubs were furious and took the issue all the way to FIFA. Australia was not the only country that had clubs openly defying FIFA in the 1950s and 60s. Colombia was suspended from 1950 to 1956 after the formation of a breakaway league led by Bogota-based club Millonarios, with the great Alfredo Di Stefano as its star player. Following the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, leading Budapest Honved players Ferenc Puskás, Sandor Kocsis and Zoltán Csizbor fled their native country. After they refused to return to Hungary, FIFA imposed a 2-year ban on them. After that ban expired, they all returned to football, with Puskás playing with the legendary Real Madrid team in the 1950s and 60s. He would later coach South Melbourne in the National Soccer League during the 1980s, a team captained by a young Ange Postecoglou. FIFA was determined to enforce its control on football around the world. If it was going to lay down its laws for some of the world's best footballers in the likes of Ferenc Puskás, then there would be no stopping FIFA when it came to the football backwaters of Australia. When Australian authorities remained defiant and refused to pay the transfer fees, the Australian Soccer Football Association had its membership suspended in April 1960. The ASFA was ultimately disbanded. Australia went 7 years without playing an international. Its last was a 2-2 draw with New Zealand in August 1958, before returning to the international stage in November 1965 in a forgettable 6-1 loss in a World Cup qualifier against North Korea. In 1961, the Australian Soccer Federation was formed as a potential successor to the ASFA. However, this association was refused readmittance to FIFA until the outstanding fines of £48,000 were paid. Gradually, relations improved, and FIFA dropped its demand to £30,000. In February 1963, Henry Siemens, the chairman of the ASF, died in Melbourne after suffering a heart attack during a lunchtime adjournment of a particularly heated meeting on the issue of readmission of Australia to FIFA. At the ASF annual meeting a month later in March, a vote was taken to return to FIFA. Then, in early April, the ASF agreed to send a £5,000 bond to FIFA, and the ASFA handed over its operations to the Australian Soccer Federation in Sydney. With their debts paid, Australia returned to FIFA. That concludes today's video. Thank you once again for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't already, why not hit that subscribe button and like the video? It's completely free and helps grow the channel. We also have channel memberships. That's a way you can financially support us, but there's no pressure to do so. But any support will help grow the quality of our videos and will help us put out more video essays like this. We'll see you in the next video.